you guys ever think about dying?
Hey friends, Alicia Wagner here, host of the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. We're landing the mothership in the real world by talking topics and tangents that deserve their own movement and momentum. Stick around. Together, we're redefining, reimagining, and rebuilding what motherhood means to you. And from there, well, we'll get the memo to the rest of them. Before we move on, I'd like to thank the incredible sponsors who saw an opportunity to support women in their day-to-day journeys by joining together to make this podcast a reality. Thank you, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Panzician with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for believing in better care, better support, and better outcomes for mamas and their families in the real world. Welcome to episode 0, friends, our first discussion and introduction to dismantling mama trauma at home, at work, in marriage, and in our parenting. How to feel, deal, and heal our way through what has been to what is waiting for us on the other side of permission and empowerment. I loved the quote in the Barbie movie, "Humans only have one ending, but ideas, they live forever." Absolutely. And today we're talking lots of ideas with my ridiculously amazing friend, Nadia Lewis, Vice President for Human Resources and the Center for Intercultural Excellence at Tiffin University. And I'm so excited to have her with me during episode 0 because you know why? I'm just so tired of watching myself and every other single woman tie herself into knots just so people will like her. And Nadia, you and I have been bantering around this conversation for years. And so it only feels right to have you with me here today to launch the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. Sis, how are you doing?
Oh my gosh. So excited to be here with you doing this. We've been talking about this forever. And you, my friend, have been so pivotal and I would say so transformative with things along the way of your journey. I would say anywhere from professional realm to us evolving into mothers and mothers in the workplace, and then everything in between, right?
Everything in between.
Everything in between. So this is great that there is a platform now solidified for us to have these important conversations, for individuals to not feel alone, and for me to kick off 0 with you.
Woo woo! You know, I'm wanting a safe place where I can go, and it's judgment free. And you know, I'll be 42 years old, and you know, I'm changing a lot. Like my style is changing, my thought processes are changing, my parenting style is changing. I'm probably the 8th version of myself in my marriage at this point, and so there's so much happening. And to have a really safe place with more women to be able to just rediscover who I am and what I want out of this next version of life, and to do it with other women. And so that's what makes me so incredibly excited to have you here today, because we need those safe women. We need these safe conversations to lean in, dive in, and experiment with what do we want and how do we want to move onward with all of that.
Yes. And removing a stigma, right? And this kind of this ever floating imposter syndrome that as women we feel, right? We have to go in a space and be something that we believe others want, and ourselves very last, very, very last. And so, and I'm with you. I'm on probably my 11th version of who I am as a wife and everything else. But with each one, right?
Maybe we need marriage Barbie, and then she has like
maybe
27 different versions of herself. I don't know. Maybe this is something we need to look into.
We do. But I feel like with each one, right, there's a caterpillar type happening with it. With every time I come out the cocoon, it's because of lessons learned.
Yeah.
Right? Good, bad,
ugly.
Maybe not so. Yeah, the ugliest of ugliest, but I do think it makes us stronger. Yeah. And hopefully we have the freedom like this in the podcast to evolve into what is needed for us and the people we love.
Yeah, I think what's been really interesting with, you know, our friendship and your professional background and mine is, you know, you're in the HR world. And so in a post-COVID world, it's been really interesting to see how things have kind of unfolded. And then now how they're kind of retracting. And so again, there's some good, some bad, some ugly in there. And so just having some space to be able to dive in and be like, wait, here are some things that are working. Here are some things that aren't. Really get each other's opinions on feedback. And I don't know about you, but I'm sick of talking about this stuff. Like, I want us to be able to have these really safe tables to pull up a chair and have some of these conversations. And whether it's the exact right strategy to move forward, we're going to fail forward and try some things as women that we want to reconstruct our homes, our friendships, our workplaces, our educational systems, our healthcare, our politics, because this ain't working out here.
Not working. It's not working. But to your point, right? I think what COVID had unleashed, other than, the obvious, right? But emotionally for so many people, is in many respects, that was like a horrible case scenario. And you went through it and you were not prepared to go through it. And yet we all came through it.
Yep.
May not have been the outcome we wanted, right? May not have been the journey that we appreciated, but to some degree, we're here in some shape or form. And I think with that, people had this moment of reflection and saying, just like that, my world can change. Just like that. So how am I leading my life authentically? So I don't have to go through it regretting what I've lost along the way.
Right? Yeah, it's really interesting, don't you think? Like, I think of 100 years ago when, we've had this pandemic that was before us and we didn't have technology. Life already wasn't moving as fast as it was, but I know you would likely agree. I'm hearing from everybody this year. This is the fastest year of their life. And I think it's because for the first time historically in 100 years, people have stopped. And whether you were working through the pandemic or not, it was still very different from how you went into it, right? Like you said, you have these moments of reflections. And I'm hearing from everybody just how fast this year is. And I think it's because we had a moment to really look in the mirror or reevaluate. And then things are picking back up at this pace. And it feels so hard for people, myself, friends, colleagues included, that it's like, wait, we're kind of getting back on a track here that I don't know if I'm in agreement with. And I think that's the tension, right? That everybody is finding themselves in. So instead of putting things back on track the way they were never working to begin with. So how can we?
On track?
Exactly.
It was never ours. It was never our definition of on track. It was basically us leading what we felt had to be led in that way.
Yep.
Right. But it was never with our heart, our soul, and even to a degree, sometimes even our values.
Yeah.
We're at a loss with that. And so how do we recenter? How do we recenter and make sure we're positioning what is most important to us? I always like to say to people, make sure you spend each day doing what gives you joy. And what does joy look like? Well, gosh, heaven forbid something, again, traumatic were to happen. You are able to say, at least I did what I wanted. Yeah. Right. I lived it the way I wanted. And why do we have to wait for something bad to happen? Why can't we do that every step of the way?
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point on the podcast, and maybe some I've listened to in the past, and why I would love to see this be a little bit different is, I was in a handful of seasons, I'm sure you were too, and many of the listeners, that there were some days that joy was razor thin. And it could have been sitting in my car listening to a fantastic song for 5 minutes before coming into my house, and that was joy. It was doing boxed breathing in my car before coming in, and just, with some of the health complications with my kids, or just some things then that were going on in my marriage. Like, I don't know. It's like joy, like how you said, we need to redefine, what's on track or what's success. I think even joy, like there were times where I would hear these podcasts about self-care and just different things going on in my life that it's like, hell, I don't even have time, right? Like I don't even have time. It feels like, to make dinner or to go grocery shopping. And I already feel like I'm failing.
I have to pencil in self-care.
Yeah, I have to pencil it in. And you know what? Though the boxed breathing and just taking that time for a song in my car to like just reconnect. And I think you said it a minute ago, just center. Like, I want this podcast. It doesn't have to be going out of town for a girls' night. It doesn't even have to be a girls' night. I mean, there's so much going on in women's lives, and depending on the access or privilege to childcare or finances, there are certain things that just, it feels so out of reach for some moms, and it's creating that mama trauma, right? So I just, even on the podcast, like, let's just simplify this. Like, to your point, what does joy look like? It could be, reading 2 pages in a book. It could be walking around your block. It could be, texting with a girlfriend hiding out in your bathroom for 3 minutes. Can you tell I've done that? Like,
have you been in my house and seen me?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about what this episode's all about.
Mm-hmm.
Why of Mama Trauma Barbie in episode 0. And let's allow listeners to understand why and now for this podcast for you.
Yeah. So we had a banner year as women, right? Like the Taylor Swift era tour, the, Beyonce tour, the Barbie movie. I mean, it was a banner year, and you could feel the energy. You can feel that. Well, we feel like we're moving in the right direction. However, there was a scene in the Barbie movie where, they're in the dance scene. It's towards the beginning, Barbie, her whole crew's over, and it was like that record screeching halt. And she's like, do you guys ever think about dying? And I just sat there and welled up with tears in my eyes, like I think so many women did with different scenes throughout the movie. And I was like, that's it. Like this is it right here. This moment, this scene. And then it was just crickets. And it was an awkward amount of silence. And everyone just sat there staring at her. And then she's like, I'm just dying to dance. And like the world went right back on. And I feel like that's what we were just talking about, right? Like we had this moment where we reflected through COVID, and now we're post-COVID, and we've had this moment where it's like, wait, we're back on this track. It's fast. It was never what we agreed or signed up for. Mm-hmm. We have this version of motherhood that we're all out here beating ourselves up, thinking that we can't keep up when, wait, none of this is right. And so we have taken what is work and we're trying to fit in our family to where it actually needs to be about our family, our values, our needs as individuals,
yes,
our relationships, and our kids. And so, 50% of kids now have a chronic illness. We have the second leading cause of death in kids is suicide. 80% of all suicides are men. And so it's not working for them either. But I think it was a really interesting point in the movie. And when you and I were having this one-off conversation the other day, it's like, I'm sitting here watching this scene, and I think so many women that I know with the pace and how it feels, and we're trying to maneuver all this, that you felt like dying. Yes. And I just thought it was really profound that this movie ends. You hear so much in the reviews about the movie, and we never visited this scene. We never talked about, we never talked about like, oh, hey, like this is the level, this is the feeling. Like, no wonder women have mental health issues. No wonder women are on antidepressants 4 times more than a man. Yes. No wonder they struggle with PTSD 2 to 3 times more than men. And so it really moved me. And I think it took what was the beginning of my motherhood journey to where I am, and just seeing it play out on the screen. I was like, all right, I can't move forward anymore. I don't want other women to move forward anymore, not knowing that they have a choice in this. Yes. And so do we all have it figured out? No. But I want us to have this podcast. I want us to have guests on. I want us to have really hard conversations. And so one of my favorite quotes is, the truth is often so valuable that it has a bodyguard of lies. And that's what I want to play with on this podcast. What are these lies? What are we telling ourselves? What are we doing when we get together with our friends, or we see marketing, or, even the standards that exist today with our workplaces, or for sure the things that are happening in our own homes? Like, we need to start picking these things up, looking at them and being like, wait, do I subscribe to this? Do I need to redefine it? Do I need to throw it away? Like, you know, when you're at the grocery store and your purse gets heavy and like they need to go do a price check? I don't know about you, but every single time I clean out my purse when they do that, and I'm like, how in the hell did this get in here? Like, you know, and that's where I think I'm at in my life. I don't think I am. And
Yep. I
like, I
definitely call
just,
my purse Mary
you,
Poppins bag.
yeah, girl. And like, I want this podcast to be a place where it's like, what are we taking out and
Yes.
how are we moving forward? But I think that too, sis, is we can't rush this. Like, I really want to slow down to speed up because we have an opportunity in a window that over the next 40 years, 70% of the wealth in the United States is going to transition to women. Like, what? Like, let's just sit with that. That is the invitation into a whole level of
Yes.
transformation and change for women. And guess what? We're not ready for it. We're working towards it, but even a lot of the women that I follow, like we're still trying to do it like a man. And we are feminine. We have these beautiful gifts. We have this power, this creativity. Like if we're going to transform this, like let's do it and let's do it right.
Right. You know what? You've said so many things that just resonated with me, and I know for a fact also with our many listeners
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to have. And at the real crust of this, I would say it's an unpacking, if you will, with each and every episode. Like you said, it's our heavy Mary Poppins of a purse that if any given day it has a floor lamp in there,
Yep.
and we're just going to unpack what's in there and unpack the things that are weighing us down, that no longer serve us, and repack in there the things that inspire us, the
Yeah.
things that make us so happy to be alive,
Mm-hmm.
to the point of the Barbie movie. And I think that's
Yes.
what it is. We have so many things packed into that purse that don't serve us at all. It serves others, but it doesn't serve us.
Mm-hmm. You know,
I
and it's
love
really
that.
interesting. Mm-hmm. The other interesting part, Nadia, too, like in the movie, like in the real world, Gloria's daughter goes with her to Barbie Land. And so
Mhm.
like it really is striking me lately that we have sacrificed our children to a certain extent, right? To like make women getting into the workforce doable. Like so much was sacrificed. And I don't want to dismiss that. I don't want to say it was wrong. I mean, it got us where we're at and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
But we've always had to like, you know, round peg, like square hole, round peg. And it
Mhm.
just, it doesn't fit the way that we've been doing it. And so we've always had to like make our kids like, they weren't in the Barbie box, right? They
Yeah.
never have been. Like we have these versions of ourselves and we're trying to inform this professional career into this personal life. And it's like, these kids really have never naturally fit into it. We've just had to make it work. I think what's
Right.
really interesting is with the chronic illness that's starting to go on with children, and 50% of them have one, that strategy doesn't work
No,
anymore. And
it
so
doesn't.
our workforces, and it was never right to begin with, right? And so, of
Mhm.
course, you know, we have things like flexible work and, you know, different parameters within the workforce. But I think it goes deeper than that. Like we got to stop just talking about it at work because we have to get in tune with it being okay even at home.
Right.
Does that
Right.
make sense? Like
It does. And I
it's
read,
this anxiety around it, this like rushing, and it's like it's just to like calm ourselves down at home to even allow ourselves to be mothers, to do the things that need done that these kids can be taken care of in their life.
right. Right. I was talking with someone the other day and we were talking same thing about the elements of the workforce and how it's changing, and specifically if it's changing at a speed that's welcoming for women in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace. We say we want to bring in diverse talent, right? But what does that really mean to create a culture that welcomes and embraces diverse talent? And that's of all, backgrounds and so forth. And so, if we started talking about like, well, you know what? We always tell people we want the best version of themselves. But the best version of themselves, especially for women, is who we're most proudest to be, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that is a wife, and that is a mother and all those things. And when you allow my best version to be what it is, I am my best version for you at work.
Yeah.
Right. So as employers, we have to think about in what ways are we able to support our workers to allow them to be the best versions of them wholly.
Yeah.
This whole misconception or belief circa 1920s or whatever it may be, that your personal life is personal, your professional life is professional, and you compartmentalize them, doesn't exist today. And that's kind of what Gen Z is trying to say with us as well. Like it all melds together. To separate it out is maybe what is at the very heart of some of the mental health struggles and so forth, because we're having to divide and be a bipolar existence.
Yeah.
It shouldn't happen. Literally.
Like we're like hearing you say that, like we're literally walking ourselves. Like that's the invitation, right?
Yes.
Like we literally have an invitation into mental health challenges. And that's why it's called the Mama Trauma podcast. Like, like understanding like, wait, we're not crazy. This is crazy. The way that we're doing it.
What I'm doing, right? So I love that with this podcast, you're not only are you unpacking all these things, but with that is to normalize the acceptance of, hey, I feel stressed out today. Hey, I don't want to have to split myself to show up as a whole nother person. Mm-hmm. I want to be who I am. You accept and welcome that. And I know in any space I belong as true as I am.
You know, it's interesting. There's another scene in the movie when Will Ferrell, the CEO, you know, Barbie shows up. She's in the boardroom, which hilarious, right? It's a table full of men making decisions on behalf of women. And so when I went and saw the movie, it was on the eve of the issue 1 vote in Ohio about changing our constitution. So it was very real for me in that evening, seeing that scene, that I'm like, wow, this is not even sarcasm at its best. This is real life in this moment. But Will Ferrell, CEO, is like, you know, why don't you just get back in the box? And she's like, okay, you know, like, sure, like the, you know, and then she's like, well, where's your CEO? And they're like, no. And she's like, you know, your CFO up here, you know, and she has this moment where she realizes she can't get back in the box. And when she doesn't, right, you feel the heat in the tone in the CEO's voice where he's like, just get back in the box, Jezebel. And, you know, what I want women in this moment to know as well is like, we've had the get back in the box going for a really long time. And we've done, okay, you know, like that's fine. We're just going to keep, right, putting ourselves into pretzels and putting and shoving ourselves back into this box. What we have to also realize is we're going to get the pushback, right? We're going to get the, you know, the Jezebel. We're pioneering out here right now. We are working off of a work week that was designed from Henry Ford's assembly line. We're working off of an educational day that our children go to school that's based off of getting kids home in time to help on the farm. We are, right? Like we're working in these systems that aren't lined up. And then of course it's like, well, get back in the box, because it does inform the current system that is working for a lot of people. And mostly 80% of the men that run our country, our organizations, our industries. And so
make decisions on laws.
It's like, so we have to really come to terms with like, okay, we know this is not working. We're not getting back in the box. We're starting to pioneer towards real transformation and change. But to pretend that this is going to be easy, it's not. And that's why I want to create this podcast, this table, this chair for women to pull up, because we can't just talk about it anymore. We really do need to have guests on that kind of take all of these sectors, right? Education, healthcare, politics, mental health, you know, just all of these different things that exist independently. Because something I hear a lot, Nadia, when I'm starting to have conversations, and I'm also launching a new holistic wellness clinic, I'm talking to a lot of men because they're running a lot of these organizations. And I start going through the importance of bringing all of this together. And here's what I hear: get back in the box. here's what I hear. You can't tackle all of these at once. And I sit there and I laugh and I'm like, I deal with all of these at once because I'm a woman and
Yes.
I have to deal with all of these things. And so we need to understand that we are going to be told to get back in the box. It is to be expected, but we have to make the decision to go onward in a different direction, and why we're going to need women in our spheres of influence, in our network, that we need to work with, work beside, get the Rocky smack from, that when it feels hard, that it's like, damn, like maybe it is going to be easier to get back in the box. And it's like, no, we can't get back in the box. Like we absolutely cannot get back in the box. Like our kids' lives depend on it, right? Like if we need any more proof, it's like we already have infant and maternal mortality rates. For an industrialized nation like the United States to have the level of women and children that are dying who cannot get the care that they need, or again, the children and the levels of suicide that are happening. Like we have every warning bell going off, and everybody that, is dun, 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 dun. Like we're these robotic figures going through life. And it's like, everything's fine. Just get back in the box. And it's like, is a mama bear? Like, I just can't do it anymore. Right. Like, and I think that's why I'm so excited that like children have to be a component of this, because they have been so dismissed. They're the ones paying for it. And at this point, it's criminal to be looking the other direction. And so we keep looking at our workplaces that are wanting to change. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of great happening there. But we have to take ownership and control and give ourselves our own Rocky smack, right? And understand that this track that we're on, not only is it not working, it is literally killing people.
Yeah.
And knowing that my daughter and her health complications are a complete, attribute to an outcome of what's happening in our world, like, no more. And so it is my responsibility. And I know many other mothers out there who feel the same, like we've got to move forward. And I don't have it all figured out. I'm informing it in this moment. I'm talking to a lot of people. I have a lot of ideas. And so I want to bring women like yourself who are out here working with companies and kind of hear, what is going on? What from your perspective on the workforce side do we think needs to change? But then also we can't keep depending on the workforce. We can't keep depending on the 80% of men that are in charge. Like we got to get out of the box, and we got to start taking our kids with us around these things that need to change at home, at work, in their schools, in healthcare, and get these things lined up so that we actually can create a system that's not going to just work for half our population, but the whole dang crew.
Right. It has to be comprehensive, right? You can't attack one thing or talk about one area and not think that there is a trickle down effect or a connection in another, right? So you have to have a comprehensive lens of understanding all the different facets of impact that plays out in our lives. Tell me a little bit about stepping in and when stepping out and stepping back in, right? Like, you've had some amazing journeys along the way. And what was like that discovery, that pinnacle moment where you're like, I'm done. I'm out the box. I blew the box up. I'm not going back out. And
no
here's
more box.
For other safe havens, for us to have this allyship as women to talk about these things.
Yeah. I think we all had a plan. And I don't know, is your plan going the way you thought your plan was going to go? Yeah.
100% no.
100% no. And so I think it's a really important point to talk with a lot of women, because they're like, well, what if it's the wrong choice? And it's like, I don't know one woman that I talk to, and it's like, well, tell me about your 10-year plan or even your 5-year plan. Like, nobody's really fully rocking that 5-year plan, right? So I even look at mine. I mean, I was doing life and business coaching and consulting. I was in pharmaceuticals, decided to leave to do consulting and life coaching. I built my practice for 5 years. I had a child who started to have health complications. So then I'm like, well, I love the work I'm doing and that I've built. So I'm going to do
Mhm.
it part-time. And then I'm going to invest in something that I can make some residual income. And like, that was my plan, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
mom it, I'm going to work it, and I'm going to have some residual income. And, my daughter's health issues just really started to put things in perspective for me prior even to COVID. And so I'm trying to take care of this child. I'm trying to still have joy, meet my
Mhm.
goals, be a great wife. And so again, you're starting, like, you can feel the steam, like, those cartoons where like things are starting to boil up and like steam is just coming out everywhere. Again, it goes to the Barbie movie. Like, do you guys ever feel like you want to die? Like, that energy was starting to be there. So I invested in a restaurant that was a clean organic restaurant. And my business partner decided about a fourth of the way through it that they weren't going to participate anymore. And so it just left me in a really interesting situation. And so
Mhm.
we'd agreed to be a partner. I was going to be a silent partner. That didn't work. And so I had to make a really tough choice. I had to put everything down that I had built 5 years investing into and go do something to save my initial investment, but to do something that was running in the opposite direction of what was needed for my daughter, for my home, for myself. And then COVID hit. And so I'm trying to run a restaurant
Yeah.
through a pandemic without a business partner and now rebuild. And so I was so excited that I was able to do that, but it was truly one of the roughest seasons of my life because my daughter's health was falling apart. The pandemic's happening, and it was a lot.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. It was a
I
lot.
remember the post you had, and because I felt the exact same way, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember loving, like, I'm not a Facebook person or anything, but I remember intentionally, if I was going to put myself on social media, I always went to one of your posts because I felt like, oh, it was my spiritual gift of the day.
Yeah.
And I remember one day you posted, I think you were running to the gas station and you realized, I don't know,
I was
something.
definitely running.
Yeah, there was some mishap or some like wardrobe malfunction or something you had. And I remember dying laughing, as well as all the other 100 mamas out there. And then we all started populating with our funny mishap stories,
Yeah.
right? And it was just a beautiful moment of us knowing, oh my God, we're not alone.
Yeah.
We've all been here. And you opened up that conversation.
Well, and I want to open up this one, right? So I rebuilt the restaurant, and here's the part where, like, what am I tiptoeing around right now? It was so traumatic. I mean, it exposed every part of me during that time, and it was really uncomfortable, right? Like,
Mhm.
my ego, and when I say ego, I'm sure quite a few people on this podcast know what that means. Like, it is the parts of you that, like, it is just trying to protect something that is not serving you anymore.
Mhm.
And so, like if this restaurant, if I have to put it down, like, what are people going to say? Like, are they going to think it's a failure? Are they going to think I didn't try hard enough? Are they going to think I gave up? And so, like, I fought that for a year. And so I built it back up. I was so proud. I hired this amazing chef. His whole family came on board. We had the best staff. Like, it was set up at this point where one day I just got this hit, this internal hit that I was supposed to sell it. And my ego's like, hell no. Right? Like, we just went through this to now sell it. And I just remember it just exposed me in a way that I'm like, what am I still holding on to? What?
Yeah.
Why are we still worrying about this stuff? And it really checked me. Like, there were some elements that I think these are the things, right? We bring home with us after work. These are the things why we stay in relationships, why we stay at jobs, why we do things that aren't serving us anymore, because who are we proving it to? And I know for me, and I've done a ton of work through coaching, and I've hired some therapists over the years, but like, it was really humbling in that moment to know that I was still trying to prove to my dad
Yeah.
that, we've got something to prove here. And it was, no, I don't. I have some family at home. I have some things going on that, like, I as this 42-year-old woman need to go take care of. And so I really followed the hit. I was like, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to sell this. Well, I am so glad that I did. I ended up finding fantastic owners who had similar values. But sis, here's what happened. I sold that restaurant in September of 2022. And in January of 2023, my daughter's health crashed. If I did not follow that hit, if I did not go with that and honor the authentic nature of what my needs were, what her needs were, what was going on real time in my life, I would have been set up for a catastrophe. And so it's interesting as women, right? Those intuitive hits that we get, I think just as humans, we run up against ego. But I think there's so much magic in the gift of women that we really do. Like we say all the time, like, I wish this thing came with instructions. Like, I wish we knew what to do. And like, I'm such a firm believer that we do. And they're in us. Like God hardwired in us who we are, what we need, but we're just constantly fighting the world. We're fighting these things in us that are trauma, these old things that just are not serving us anymore. And so I was so grateful for the year's worth of work that I did. But man, it was just this most recent stint where just some things got brought out that it's like, oh, okay, so we're still trying to prove here. Like we're like who, right? Like there's no one to prove to. This is my family. These are my needs. This is what's going on. And so that's one of the reasons that we're here. Like I want for each woman listening, like, what are you fighting, sis? Like what are we still trying to prove or do that's not needed here anymore? And so I want to take this podcast in this season. Like I had a year before I sold the restaurant where I was dealing with my own health issues. Like I hired a wonderful manager. She took it over and I was so excited to be like, I'm free. Like I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to networking and I was going to run somewhere, right? Because that's what I'm used to doing. And I'm not joking. A week after, my health tanked. And one of my naturopath physicians was like, your cortisol, like your body just got so used to doing it the way that you were doing. And I crashed. And I was out of the game like for a year. I mean, I was still running the restaurant behind the scenes and still figuring out how to sell it, but still all the day to day that goes with it. But here's what I want to bring up for women. And I'd love your thoughts on this. Like I notice out here, like, okay, I'm 42. Like I'm guessing a lot of women that are going to be listening to this podcast, right? They want to be moms. They are moms. They're in the middle of motherhood. They're grandmas, like, or a mom, right? Like this podcast is for everybody. But here's what I'm noticing. Women are coming up on this line, not once, but just like in our marriages, right? You're the however version of yourself you are, and I'm at mine. We do the same things as women. And so we come up to these lines and we're like, wait, something needs to change. And it's like, well, what if I put it all down? Like, who am I if I put all of that down? And so we're basing our value and worth on what we do, who we think we need to be. And it's like, hey, plot twist, value and worth is who you are. Like you are already so valued and so loved. And so here's what's really interesting. If I didn't sell the restaurant, if I did not get my daughter's health in check, I mean, I put it all down. All of it. I put all of it down to care well for me and to care well for my daughter.
Yeah.
If I did not do that, it's what I needed to slow down to speed up to get where I'm at now, or it would have been the same thing. It would just be running on fumes. It would be this empty gas tank that wouldn't be anywhere near what I need to catapult myself where I'm at right now. Like I have the energy and the fortitude and the determination and the permission in myself to be like, here's what I want and here's what I want, like moving forward. And it's interesting to me that so many women keep saying to me, oh, you're so busy. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I was home for like a year. And so Nadia, what I want so many of our listeners to understand today too is like, nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
No, nobody knows. It's not that they don't care. They have their own trauma and their own life. And here we are like the whole time, this little element of like, well, what happens if I put it all down? Like, do I have to start over? Like, oh my gosh, like, how will I be seen? Am I still going to be credible? Will people still hire me? And it's like, nobody noticed I was gone. Like I go to networking events and they're like, oh man, I'd love to meet. I know you're probably really busy. Like, what are you, like 3 months out? And I'm like, no, I've been home for the past year taking care of myself and my daughter. Like, let's meet. Right. And so I just want women to understand that these are the things that we have to take into consideration, and putting something down in care of yourself, your family, that is leverage. That is building
Mhm.
the foundation to going next level.
And you are enough, right? Like whatever version you want to show up in the world that day as, you're enough.
You're enough. I think when I was doing life coaching before getting into the restaurant, one of the most fascinating components to me was when, and as a coach, you're not giving advice. Like what's so powerful is people show up and they're
Mm-hmm.
working through their own intuition and their own knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
informing what is needed in their life. And it's gorgeous and I love it. And it's why it's changed my life and why I left corporate to go do it. But what was so powerful was when people would show up. Like I would have moms that are like, okay, I'm here to, figure out like how to get promoted to the VP position. And lo and behold, there would be a few of them that are like, I don't want the VP position. I want to stay home and be with my kids. And then I would have women showing up like, I'm home with my kids and I want to find what would bring meaning in life. And it's like, I want to get back. I want to go to law school. I want to it just was so fascinating at times, the layers that we pile on, or like we talked about, that stuff that finds its way into your Mary Poppins purse that
Uh-huh.
just needs to come out. And so just allowing this podcast to be that safe space that it's like, let's get some stuff out. Like I needed to get out that, here I am. It's still sneaking in that at times I'm trying to prove to myself that there's more to this. And there's not. There's me, there's my family, there's my purpose, and that's for you too, right? I mean, I've got to think you have a similar example or something that you want to share that was
No,
that defining moment for you.
listen, that's so much of what resonated with your stories, right, throughout the year. Just us being connected and knowing each other and basically going through motherhood around the same time, but yet still being fervently ambitious
Mhm.
females in
Mhm.
life, right? I can't just say just the workplace, because we both also volunteer because
Mhm.
of our hearts and we see need and we're there.
Yeah.
Um, my biggest thing is I don't give myself enough grace to say no. I absolutely need to say no to a lot more things than what I do. But there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome at
Yeah.
play. Me feeling I have to be a certain way as a wife, as a mother, as a professional, right? How I volunteer my time, how I show up for my friends, all of those things.
Yeah.
If you ask me at the end of the day, what's the most important thing to me? Of the 50 things I'm doing, there's probably 3 to 4 that really, really make me happy. Like if I did nothing else, but those 4 things were at their pinnacle and I know they were loved and taken care of and they were happy, I'm happy. Right. And so I've been spending a lot of time, and you and I talked about this the other day, a lot more time thinking, does this serve me in the way that I'm happy if nothing else happened?
Yeah.
Right. And that has to be the very center. Everything else will flow. Right. Because if my kids are happy and I feel like I'm showing up the best I can as a mother, the best I can as a wife, the best I can as a friend, um, all that goodness, all that good karma of life will flow
Mhm.
and happen, and then it will also allow me to fill other cups, because
Yeah.
I can't let my cup be empty. I
Yeah.
can't fill from an empty cup. So I need to make sure first and foremost that I am filling my cup in the way first and foremost um, that allows me to be the very best presence in this world. And
Mm.
sometimes that's spiritual connection, right?
Yeah.
And so if I do those things, then everything else will flow. The professional existence, everything else will come into play. I will pour my heart into the things that I also appreciate
Yeah.
if
No,
I
I love
focus on
that.
them.
I love that. It's interesting. I like one of my favorite quotes is, if it feels hard, it is. And
Mm,
so leaning into that. And
yeah.
so I want women to know, like, yeah, there's sacrifices that
Yeah.
come with choosing those 3 or 4 things, right? Like I lost an
Not for the faint of
entire,
heart.
yeah, I lost an entire friend group through the restaurant. Looking back, right? Like I didn't even know what was going on at the time, right? My daughter's health is falling apart. My business partner was MIA, the pandemic's happening. Like looking back, and that's why this is called the Mama Trauma podcast. Like not only do we have old trauma, what we're currently maneuvering as mothers is current trauma. And your
Mm-hmm.
body doesn't understand the difference between old trauma and new trauma.
Yeah.
It just knows the energy, it knows the anxiety. And so that's why one of my favorite quotes, and what it's like the flag for me, when something feels hard, it is. I lean
Yes.
so hard into that because I'm like, okay, is this something that is old, right? Like, am I trying to prove, right? Like, I think we
Mm-hmm.
forget too, like, even doing the work, it's not that stuff disappears. It's bringing that stuff in and it sits with you and you know what to do with it moving forward, right? Like I know when stuff is old stuff now, right? Like it's showing
Yeah.
up and it's just trying to get in my way, steal my joy. But
Yes.
there are real things sometimes that we have to evaluate that are just going to continue to come forward. Like I'll give you an example. I overheard a phone conversation about me last year. And I called somebody to let them know they had forgot something. Went to threw my phone in my purse. Went to go say goodbye to some people. Get in my car and my Bluetooth connects, and I'm listening to a group of people who are male talk about their expectations for me. And so it was really interesting. Again, as a 40-year-old woman,
Yeah.
listening to a group of individuals have expectations in such like a path for me that I did not agree to, that I made crystal clear over the past year that it's like, look, here's what I'm thinking. I want to be super transparent. And still to hear that phone conversation, it made me realize that day the sacrifices that will come with the decisions to stand tall in who we are and ask for what we need. And it made
Mm,
me realize that when you hear that term, like we're not fighting flesh and blood, like we really are fighting being forced back into the box every
mm-hmm.
single day. And so I was so grateful. I'm like, okay, God, like, why did I hear that phone conversation?
Yes.
And listen, I don't hold it against the people that I heard talking about it. It informed me that like this is the reality of what's going on
Going
and
on.
why we have to do something about it. Like here's a group of people that had a plan for me that I made crystal
Without your
clear
permission.
without my permission that this is like, what they'd like to see. And it was like, wait a minute, I did not agree to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really like made me put my foot down that day and made me want to do this podcast. And when I saw the Barbie movie, and it's like, do you guys ever just feel like you want to die? And it's like, well, yes, because these are the expectations. These are the standards. This is the life that has been built for us. And if we want to see a different one, we're going to have to realize what Susan B. Anthony did her and the gang in order for us to get the right to vote. We have to know what Abraham Lincoln did for slavery. We have to know what Martin Luther King did for civil rights. And like
Yeah.
they boycotted the bus system for 13 months. And then we sit here as women and we're like, I'd really like to see some things change. And so, yeah, so would
We
I.
will.
But like,
Yeah.
we're going to have to do something about it. And we're going to have to decide that what are our 3 or 4 things that are really important to us. And then what's the thing that we are going to fly our flag so high on? And I'm hopeful that through this podcast, women can start to figure out what that is. Like,
Yes.
listen, am I really passionate about the education system and knowing that we're dealing with the system that we are still operating off of that's for kids coming home from school to do farming? Like, let's do something about that, right? Like, hey, healthcare, it works for a majority of people who have access, but it doesn't work for everyone. And 50% of kids have chronic illness, and most employers aren't even covering coverage for families and individuals to get the type of preventative care or the type of care that they need to actually get to root cause
Yes.
help. And so
Yes.
who wants to get involved with that, right? Like it's really starting to uncover like what are these systems? How do we help better inform them? Because again, we do have women stepping into 70% of the financial wealth in the United States over the next 40 years. So if we don't take that one nugget, if we don't start
Leverage our
understanding,
opportunity and our platform while we have it, while
girl,
we have it. And so much of it, and you and I were talking about this the other day, is that this is the time and very well the place to do it through this podcast.
amen.
And the reason being is because the ball that needs to start the change movement is conversation. Conversation, conversation, conversation. Because, yeah, not one person can do this. But you know what? We form an allyship and we start with conversing and understanding the intersectionality of everything that we have together. Wow, what an amazing world we can actually work towards changing for our kids.
Yeah. And and that's what I want every listener to understand. Like, listen, some of you are on the floor. Some of you are in that window where I was for 2 years where, we hear these things and it's like, well, how do I find my place in it? Right now, your place is to sit on the floor, figure
Mhm.
out what is feeling so hard for you, and you work on that. There's those of us now that are on the other side, like that's that intersectionality component of this, that like there are people who are now past that need to turn around and offer the hand up. And so I think what's been hard for me that I'm articulating in this moment is, again, we've made this so robotic that like, here's the path forward. And it's like, no, it's not. Like there are people who are healing right now. There are
Mhm.
people who are feeling, and there are people who are dealing. And so the people that are now through that, like we have people that now that are just sitting there that need to be pioneering. Those are the ones that should be championing or, speaking people's names when they're not in the rooms,
Yes.
offering the helping hand. And I see a lot of women that, we're just doing this the same way that guys have always been doing it. And that's going to leave so many behind. And like, that's just not what we need. We need more, women of color. We need more women who are in poverty getting the opportunity to get access to healthcare. Like we can't keep doing this the way that we're doing it, or we're doing it the way that we've always been doing it. And so I think that's where working at Cherry Street Mission, for close to a year, like it changed my life, because
Mm,
we're out here thinking that we know everything. And if you don't understand poverty, then I don't think you understand how the world works. And it
exactly.
changed my life. And so I think that's where having these conversations on this podcast, like, I used to be, somebody that it's like, well, lift yourself up from your bootstraps. And I laugh at the old version of myself, because I think that's really why God gave me these situations of working at a food bank, uh, my world crashing down and needing to rebuild something on my own.
Yes.
Having a child with health complications has helped me better understand what it must be like to lose a loved one, or to deal with
Yes.
somebody who is sick, somebody that is navigating grief and loss. And so, I don't like that I've had to go through some of the things that I've had to go through, but I'm grateful for them because it's allowing me the opportunity to love my neighbor better. And if
Yes.
we're going to change the workforce, if we're going to change the world for women, if we're leaving one behind, then I don't think we're doing this any different than the way that we've done it before.
Agreed. Agreed. And I love that you've learned from some of these things, right? Like you did not take those things as simply as obstacles. You said, what are my learning lessons from this? And how can
Yeah.
I move forward and fail forward
Yeah.
from having gone through some of these challenges? Same
Yeah.
as myself, and I totally believe God puts us in situations and areas in our lives, hoping we come through it and we do something with the gift
Yeah.
of having learned it. And so with mine was a dear friend going through mental health challenges and me not understanding why as a what I saw was a fantastic mother, a very smart, savvy business female. Why would she choose to end her life
Yeah.
with so much going for her? And it was at that time I was able to work for a mental health, alcohol, drug, and addiction services. And people always go, how did you take this path? Because you were here, and then you did that. And it was the strangest way that I ended up getting that job, but I did. And then it was probably 6 months into it. I remember driving home and looking up and thinking, thank you, I get it.
Yep.
Right. There was that season that I needed to do that to heal from that individual's death, but then also giving her that grace of what at that time was a very challenging decision, but a decision she made.
Yeah.
And so I needed to go through that and learn what mental health and crisis look like in order to have that level of not closure, because closure would mean I moved past it and did nothing more with it, but to then say, I want to make sure women don't ever feel like they have that only option.
Yeah.
And what can I do to make sure there's no one else that feels like that was their only outcome?
And that was why I was so grateful that you agreed to do this. And I'm so just grateful in this moment for you sharing that story, because it really goes back to what we started with, right? Why the podcast? And it's that scene of women saying, do you feel like you want to die? And like your friend, there are too many women that are walking around feeling this way. And we're just going through the motions, going through this standard that's working for no one.
Yeah.
When we have people that are out here begging, right? Begging for things to look and feel different. And so we got to slow down to speed up. You know, if we want to change the world, one of my other favorite quotes is, it starts with us. It starts with the people in front of us. It starts with our community. And that's how we change the world. And so I'm so grateful that you shared that story, because it really just comes back to the basics of what this podcast is about, why we're deciding to get to the table, pull out a chair, pull some things out of this bag that is entirely way too heavy, get some things out, and just really start to rediscover, what we want moving forward. Because what I see lacking is not lack of conversation, but it's a lack of a movement around what do we want and what are we asking for and what are we going to do about it? Right. And so I want women to know, like, this is not going to be your toxic positivity podcast. Like, we want you to have had these experiences and know that they're valued and that they're seen and heard for what they are, and that they were traumatic. But how do we take what was, right, my path of some mama trauma, your path in dealing with a friend and losing her, and how traumatic, and how we're going to allow that to better inform where we're at and how we want to move with our lives with these nuggets that we've learned, in order to not only help ourselves, but to help the women around us and actually get out of the box and get some change that's going to be better for our daughters and our sons. So I love the quote from the Barbie movie as well. We mothers stand still so our daughters can look back and see how far they've come. Like that's what this is about.
I love that. And I took a fierce conversation training several years ago, and I was doing a training the other day. And as going into it, we had our conversations along the way for this. And this very much is preventing what we talk about at Fierce, is that through the conversations, our lives will fail or succeed. And in order to do that, you have to stop waking up at suddenly, but recognize and living gradually. Right.
That.
And so if you hear about, a failing a marriage or a situation, in a relationship, it hits us at suddenly. Although if we reflect, it's been happening all along. A lost job opportunity, we wake up at suddenly. Well, we could have seen that, the relationship severing all along. And so if you think about in life, what were the times you woke up at suddenly? But what happened if you actually captured it at gradually? And so this,
so good. So
my
good.
dear friend, is to capture gradually, because suddenly is what's been happening all along.
Yeah.
Suddenly is what makes us look back and say, we could have made that change.
Yeah.
We are going to take gradually by the horns and make those changes as it's happening. Talk about it as it's happening. So that way we don't have to hit the bottom floor to then say, we could have changed it if we would have had just one more conversation about it and did something with it.
Girl, it's the whole point of the podcast right there. And this is why I
Yes.
was so excited to have you with me today. We have certainly been running circles around this for a really long time.
Mhm.
I think you said it best the other day when we talked. There's so much of these conversations happening in rooms. They're happening with higher ups. But some of the strategies for what we're really talking about are still really missing the mark. And
Yeah.
so women really having permission at this time to get out of the box, right? Harness that courage, that pioneering that it's going to
Look, a
take for
seat to
us to
this
come
table.
together. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Here's a seat
Have
at the
your voice.
table.
Have your voice heard.
Listen, are we always going to agree on this podcast together? I think we will agree to disagree on some topics that we're going to take out of the box, but we need to start having them, right? Too much has become politicized. Too much has become so black and white, and we really do have to get into some gray. But I think what's been really great about some of the women in my network and yours, and with bringing so many of us together, is how can we respectfully lay these things out and have a really in-depth conversation around them and figure out what we can agree on and start to move forward from those places. Because if we're just going to keep arguing, for instance, if abortion is right or wrong, we're missing the women that need the help right now. If we're going to continue to just argue about the workplace and what needs to change, well then guess what? We have more women leaving because 50% of kids have a chronic illness, and we're losing not only talent, but we're losing economic backbone that's holding up our whole country. And so it's bigger than just the one thing, right? It is the suddenly, it is the gradually, and this is the table and the place to start having some of those conversations safely and to be seen and heard around what women really need, moving not only forward, but onward, and who they are and their value, their worth, and their purpose. So, sis, I am so grateful for your time today. Is there anything else that you would like to say that's going to help our listeners better inform why they should continue to move onward with us in these conversations?
Tune in. My gosh. I mean, there's no other forum like this at all. And it's, every listener has a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be, resources where they can connect with you. And if it's topics or things they want us to put out there, and yes, let's have those conversations. Let's have a cup of coffee or wine, whatever is your thing. And let's just show up for each other, have this mothership, allyship, Barbie trauma, and know that, you have a space where we can lean into these conversations and have them safely. But then also with this, knowing you're not alone, don't ever feel defeated, because, there is so much intersectionality in what we do as women day in and day out. But let's talk about it first. And then let's talk about how we're going to build resources and access and opportunity so we can always go onward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nadia Lewis, thank you so much, friend. You are a gift to this world. I am so grateful that those years of conversations have found their way to this podcast, and that we keep talking, and that we keep informing the change, we keep informing the unity and the support and guidance that needs to happen in order to get us from where we are to where we want to go. And we know that's not inside of a box. Thanks for tuning in, sis. Remember, you are enough as is. See you next time. Until then, onward. Don't miss our next episode with Beth Lambert, author of Brain Under Attack and founder of Epidemic Answers. You will want to be here. See you next week as we uncover toxic load and how it's literally the core issue causing mama trauma in America today. Join me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or TikTok at Mama Trauma Barbie. And please subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your other mama friends. Thanks again to our sponsors, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Pansition with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for helping us land the mothership in the real world.